Gary DePaul with Unlabeled Leadership. Welcome to Episode 5, Believing in Others. Let's get started. If you read enough leadership books, you'll start to notice that chapters are surrounded around values or qualities. These are things like agility, catalyst, humility, courage, compassion, flexible, global, inclusive, empathy, truthful. That's just to name a few. A few years ago, I participated in 3 LinkedIn discussions. The moderators asked, "What are leadership qualities?" And people chimed in. Well, I counted 270 qualities that participants mentioned. And that is after I removed the duplicates. What I learned from doing this is, first, qualities are vague. Second, I can't tell if they apply to leadership or if they apply to just being a good person. Third, I learned there's very little agreement on what the qualities are of leadership. Instead of qualities, what I decided to do was focus on leadership principles. Now, leadership principles are still abstract, but they're a little bit more specific than qualities. Think of principles like a compass. It's something that can guide you through turbulent and even calm times. They help us with decisions, and they remind us how we want to behave while warning us of habits that we want to avoid. Like qualities, experts and professionals in general don't agree on what the guiding principles are for leadership. What I tried to do was find some commonality, and it was just something simple. I took 16 leadership books, read them. Okay, maybe that's not so simple. I read 16 leadership books, and I'll put in the notes what those are. What I tried to do was analyze them as a group and figure out what are some of the principles that these different experts were talking about. Before I continue, let me share one observation I have about principles. These principles are simple, and almost too simple. The problem is there's a lot of complexity under these. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. I'll use an analogy to do this. In the United States, Americans, they just love their cars. Go into any city, you'll see them everywhere. Suppose you live in the United States and you're ready to buy a new car. And let's say for some reason you decided on buying the Chrysler Pacifica. Like a good consumer, you read up on it, you get the brochures, you go online if you have a computer, and you build your own vehicle through their applications, and you just become an expert on the Chrysler Pacifica. Now, here's something that really is odd. When you're out on the street, you're going to start noticing this van is everywhere. Oddly enough, you never noticed that this van was everywhere. Before, there were just a bunch of vehicles, vans, and you might recognize one every so often. But now, your brain tells you every time you see one of these vans. The same is true with principles. If I read the list of the 7 principles that I found, you would probably say, yeah, that makes sense. No big deal. Well, what happens when you start to study these principles in earnest? You start to pick up on people's behaviors. You notice things differently, and you notice your own behavior differently. The more you focus on them, the more aware you are of your behavior and the behavior of the people around you. But when you're first introduced to them, you may not think much of them. With that said, I'll go ahead and list them. Here they are. Believe in others, connect with others, put others first, give up control, encourage change, collaborate with others, and develop leadership practices continuously. See, nothing special, pretty straightforward. But I'm going to take a closer look at the first one, believe in others, or you can say believing in others, because it's kind of an active thing. Here we go. Part 1. So, why did you hire me? Believing in others has a premise that people intend to do good, that they're capable of solving problems, taking advantage of opportunities, delivering solutions. If you follow that principle, then something happens. You become more capable of connecting with other people. You're able to empower them more, and you encourage them to develop on their own. Freeberg, who wrote a book called Nuts about Southwest Airlines, put it this way: when people believe in you, they help you blossom, they help you become bigger, stronger, and more capable. Here's another quote from Freeberg. Find the undeveloped potential in the people with whom you work. Take a moment to see them not as they are, but as they can be. When you do, our bet is that two things will happen. First, they will act and perform according to the image that you have of them. And second, your faith in the potential of the human spirit will be restored. To some extent, everyone uses this principle, whether they're trying to practice leadership or not. I mean, you have to believe in something about the people around you. Well, that's the simple view of the principle. Well, I'm going to give you an example of when we follow this principle and when we stray from it. And it's something that anyone working in corporate America or a large organization, you'll recognize. Here we go. If you talk to hiring managers, they'll tell you they're looking for qualified candidates, people with the right credentials, the right experience, and even the right personality. At one medical organization, the chief HR officer hired people in the HR department who had PhDs. He kind of collected them. Anyone who had a PhD, and if you have a name badge, by goodness, you better put PhD at the end of your name, because when all of you are in a room with this chief HR officer, that CHRO wants stakeholders to know he has the brightest people working for him. Okay, here's the reality. You get hired, you have your PhD, you go to work, you have it on your name tag, and as soon as you get there, you start to follow orders. You thought you were being hired because of your credentials, meaning that you can actually act on your credentials. But in this particular case, this HR officer, he wanted to tell people what to do. He did not want people to act on their own because he did not trust them. I know of two organizations where senior VPs were so distrustful. They set a rule with their department, and these are large departments of 50 to 150 people. The rule was, unless you're a senior director, you cannot talk to vice presidents in the company. And you definitely cannot make a decision and tell a vice president what your decision is. This is the classic case where hiring managers believe that they need to hire the best people around. But when candidates show up to work for the first time, they cannot perform at their best. They're limited in what they can do, what they can say, and what decisions they make. That is the ugly part of corporate America. Well, maybe what I just said sounds foreign to you. Maybe that's not your work situation. If that's the case, then I envy you. On future podcast episodes, I'm going to bring in some guests who have experienced that negative situation, but they've managed to transcend that thinking and shifted from not believing in people to believing in the people they work with. What you're going to hear are stories where people manage to get together, believe in one another, are able to collaborate, and manage to accomplish the extraordinary. Part 2, play ball. There's a movie called Trading Spaces in which two millionaire brothers take on a wager. One of the brothers argues he could take someone off the street, put that person in the right situation, in the right environment, and that person will flourish as an executive. The other brother disagreed, and that's what the wager was about. It turns out that the brother that believed he can do this fulfilled his prophecy. He was right. When I've worked at large organizations, either as an internal employee or a consultant, I frequently see people in management stereotyping individual contributors or executives stereotyping directors, or directors stereotyping managers. They stereotype people in their particular roles. When they do that sort of thing, it becomes very hard for employees to prove that they're promotable, that they're worthy of moving up to the next level simply because of this stereotype. I have a belief that if you put the right person in the right environment, that person can excel. I think some executives would be really surprised if they did take some supervisors and made them senior directors to see what they can do. And like the movie Trading Spaces, you just don't put someone in a particular role and say, have at it. You have to set their environment, give that person opportunities, coaching, consulting, helping that person along, and then you can have someone that accelerates in the role. Now let me shift gears and change to the baseball analogy. In baseball, players go up and they swing a bat at a ball and try to hit it somewhere within the park, or even hitting it out of the park. And depending on where they hit it, they can advance to various bases: first base, second base, third base. For example, if someone hit a ball in the corner of the park, they could run and get what's called a triple. Here's how the baseball analogy works in an organization. When you have an employee, say an employee that reports to you, comes up to you and you assign a task. That task is similar to sending someone up, a player up, to swing at the baseball. As a manager, there's a couple of things that you can do. One is you could stand there, give the player directions, say precisely how you want the player to hit the ball, where you want the ball to go, and make sure that what happens is exactly as you describe it. If the player or the employee isn't skilled in doing the task, maybe you do have to give some guidance, direction, coaching to make sure that the player is set up for success. But other times, the player is skilled, and all you have to do is tell the player to hit the ball. Well, maybe you do give some guidance, say something like, all you want the player to do is get a hit, or you really need the player to hit a home run. Regardless, you give the player an opportunity to accomplish the task to the best of her or his ability. Let the player make some decisions in how to accomplish what needs to be done. The point of the analogy in this story is that we tend to be more controlling. We tend to not believe in people's capabilities, and we tend to not give them the opportunity to complete tasks in the way that that person feels or believes the task needs to be completed. As long as people are able to hit the ball, with the analogy, or just complete the task on their own. As you're going to hear from some guests on the show, when you believe in your people, the people that you work with, you take a step back, amazing things begin to happen. So you'll be amazed at what they can accomplish. Part 3, people can learn. One of the reasons why managers don't believe in others is they have this underlying conscious or unconscious belief that intelligence is static. In other words, intentionally or not, they treat people as if they cannot change, develop, grow, or learn from their mistakes or successes. Hilary Scarlett is the author of Neuroscience for Organizational Change, an evidence-based practical guide to managing change. In the book, she talks about something called neuroplasticity. This is the brain's ability to restructure. Neuroscientists have discovered that we can continue to learn in old age. As we learn, something happens in the brain. The brain starts making connections and strengthens existing ones. And as those connections happen, we become more skilled and we can complete tasks faster. What that means is there is hope for this podcast. The podcast will get better over time because I'll continue to learn and improve the show. While there's hope for this podcast, There is hope for us as managers to recognize that people can change, they can develop, and we can get better at not stereotyping people in particular roles. As you actively integrate believing in others, that principle, into your beliefs and how you view people, you'll start to lead a little bit differently. When you internalize the other 6 principles, the extraordinary can happen. In future podcasts, listen to the stories. I think you're going to find some excellent illustrations of the principle believing in others, which can help all of us become better at leadership. For links related to this podcast, go to the show notes. Also, go to the website, unlabelleadership.com, and think about clicking the message icon. You can leave a 1-minute message to me, and maybe I'll play it on the air in a future podcast. Thank you for supporting the show, and thank you for listening. Until next time, lead on.